Hello, this is a mini lecture on learning and cognition. I am Mr. Richard. Today I am going to talk about Piaget and his stage theory of cognitive development. First of all, I want to make a brief introduction. When people mention Piaget, the first picture that comes into our mind is an old man in his 70s or 80s with white hair and a smoking pipe. But actually, Piaget produced most of his important work when he was a middle-aged man, and he was a Swiss who spent almost his entire academic life in the University of Geneva. As you may know, he was a psychologist, but more precisely, he was a biologist turned psychologist. The reason I mention this is because this identity has important implications for us to understand his theories and how we may apply his theory to education and psychology. Piaget himself never said that he was a cognitive or developmental psychologist. He even claimed that
Deux mots de l'idée centrale de notre épistémologie génétique, parce qu'elle est presque toujours mal comprise.
he saw himself as a genetic epistemologist. To understand this, let's take a look at the first word, genetic. Genetic in this context doesn't mean the study of genes. It means genesis, origins, or beginning. So Piaget is interested in the origins of something. Of what? Then comes the epistemology. The word means theory of knowledge. So combine them together. Genetic epistemologist means someone who is interested in the origin of knowledge. Let's put it another way. What Piaget was interested in is how knowledge is constructed in our human mind. This explains why Piaget's theories sometimes are called constructivism theories. So much for the introduction. Next, let's take a look at one of Piaget's most important contributions to psychology, the stages of cognitive development. Essentially, there are four stages of development in Piaget's theory. From birth to 2 years old is the first stage called sensory motor stage, during which the central objective is to acquire the capacity for internal thinking through touching, smelling, looking, and listening. And from 2 to 7 years old, children start to enter into the pre-operational stage, during which the central objective is to make intelligence less egocentric and more socialized. Then in the third stage, the central objective of cognitive development is to bring intelligence into conformity with the fundamental laws of logic and mathematics. During the final stage, which is the formal operational period, the central goal is to extend forms of logical and mathematical reasoning to abstract symbolic level with the aid of language. Oftentimes, we may forget these stages and what they mean. To help you remember, you can use the acronym called SPCF. I'm kidding. The best way to remember is actually to understand it and connect it to our real world experience. So let me start with the sensory motor stage. Oh yes, another thing I want to say. Piaget's theory sometimes could also be understood as a type of developmental constraints theory, because in each stage there are something children they are able to do, and there are other things they're not able to do. So I think maybe listing those things they can or cannot do can help you better understand the characteristics of each stage. In sensory motor stage, which is from birth to 2, children are able to do some basic reflexes like sucking reflex and grabbing reflex. And the goal-directed behaviors that are focused mainly on objects.
Go get it. Oh, you brat.
They will also develop objective permanence, which is the ability to understand that physical objects continue to exist even when out of sight. And some early signs of symbolic thought as well, mainly based on the use of objects. What are the things children are not able to do during this stage? They just start to learn language, which they are still explore and not very good at. And language is a major tool of symbolic thinking. So they are struggling with representing events they have experienced. What they feel is mostly happens here and now. So they seem to have little sense of time, like past, now, and future. And when children go into the pre-operational stage, their vocabularies explode. They are able to use language to think and act. One great example of this is symbolic play or pretend play. When in this kind of play, they can pretend that something has some other functions, and themselves could also become someone else.
Is a main element in much of the play of children between the ages of 18 months and 7 years. We don't expect you to watch the whole tape at once, as there is so much to be learned from each sequence. At the beginning of each sequence, we have suggested areas of interest, but it is up to individuals to use the material to meet their own observation goals.
Because they can engage symbolic acts, they are able to recall past events and envision future ones. They will be able to tie their experience together into an increasingly complex understanding of the world. However, there are still things they cannot understand, like taking another person's perspectives. This phenomenon is also called egocentric, and they seem to be lack of logical reasoning. And here comes the classic example Piaget has used to illustrate the characteristics of this stage: conservation.
Tell me when this one is the same.
The same.
The same? Those two are the same now?
Yeah.
Okay. They're the same? Good?
The way they're the same. Huh?
Good. Okay, now watch this. We're going to take the blue water from this glass, and we're going to pour it into this glass. Now, does this glass have more water? Does this glass have more water, or are they the same?
Has more water.
This one has more water?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why?
Because that one's.
In this video, you can see that the child can only compare the amount of liquid based on his perception rather than logic. And this deficiency is overcome when children go into the concrete operational stage. During this period, which is from 7 to 11 years old, children are able to use logic to deal with objects and events that are concrete and observable. They can easily solve the liquid conservation problem, but still, as the stage name has implied, they have difficulty with abstract things like mathematical concepts and hypothetical ideas. Here's another example that illustrates children's inability to use deductive logic.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
No, it won't.
And this is the second rule. Don hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
Nothing.
Nothing happened? Why didn't anything happen?
Because the feather was soft.
And if you ask a child older than 11, the child would easily figure out the logic and tell you that feather broke the glass. What Piaget proposed about children's cognitive development during this stage is that they can do many things they cannot do before, like understanding abstract concepts in math and science, understanding hypothetical ideas, and the ability to test these ideas. They would also be able to understand contrary to fact statements like feather breaking glass. Okay, now you probably have a complete picture of what each developmental stage means. Is that it? One thing I want to say is that stage theory is actually one of the many contributions Piaget has made. And but have you wondered why children are able to do what they can do in each stage? Have you ever thought about the mechanisms behind this developmental trajectory? In the last section of my lecture, I'm going to talk about an important mechanism that enables children to develop their cognitive abilities, and that is decentration. Simply put, decentration refers to the ability to take perspectives. Why is this ability critical to cognitive development? Because by taking perspectives, children are able to move away from themselves when thinking about things.
What did you just do to me?
Well, just like that. And when children move away from themselves, they will have a broader perspective, a broader view of things. And these things then become tools and symbols in their mind, which would enable children to manipulate and use. And this process is called internalization. Again, go back to these 4 stages. There are at least 3 types of decentration that occur during these stages. The first decentration occurs when children transit from sensory motor to pre-operational stage. During this transition, a child explores the outside world through touching, smelling, looking, etc. And through the interaction with objects, children start to understand that the things or objects around them are different from themselves. It seems to be a simple, small step, but it is also a giant leap for a baby.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
If this is the giant leap, then language must be the rocket that helps the baby make the achievement. An important function of language is for children to represent things they experience in everyday life. And then comes the second decentration, which occurs when children transit from pre to concrete operational stage. They not only realize that they are different from the things around themselves, but there is also a mental world where you can stand back and look at yourself and the objects around you from another perspective. This makes them realize that the way things work do not always follow the way they look like, and there must be some laws, or rules, logics that govern how things work. So this is how logic comes into play. In the third decentration, a further step is made by taking the perspectives of other people. Like I said, the previous decentration concerns the relationship between object and self, but the third concerns the relationship between self and other people. Children start to understand that other people may have different points of view toward the same thing, but there is a collective world where people hold the same view. And this is why they can accept counter-to-fact statements and come up with hypothetical ideas. Because these ideas, although different from what he thinks or she thinks about the world, may be heard by other people.